Every morning, I wake up next to the man I've pretended to love for 20 years. I kiss him goodbye, cook his favorite meals, and play the role of the perfect wife while methodically dismantling his family's empire from within. They don't suspect that their trusted daughter-in-law remembers exactly what they did to my mother, driving her to madness and a failed suicide attempt when I was 18. I've spent 2 decades crafting myself into their ideal, the supportive wife who brings tea during business meetings, the charming hostess at charity galas, the quiet voice of reason in family conflicts. My husband thinks he knows me. His parents believe they can trust me. None of them realize that every business success I've helped orchestrate was carefully designed to create devastating vulnerabilities in their corporate empire. The evidence is mounting. The allies I've cultivated are in position. My hand is on the trigger that will expose decades of their crimes, and not even my husband's genuine moments of kindness can stop what's coming. But as I prepare to destroy the family that ruined mine, I'm facing an uncomfortable truth. The mask I've worn for so long has become my face. In becoming my mother's avenger, I've transformed into something even she wouldn't recognize. Before we start this journey together, buckle up, get ready and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. Standing before the full-length mirror in the bridal suite, I adjust my veil one final time. The white lace cascades perfectly, framing my face in a way that makes me look ethereal, innocent. The dress, with its intricate beading and flowing train, cost more than some people make in a year. The Kims spared no expense for their only son's wedding. My soon-to-be mother-in-law rushes in, fussing with my dress. "Jinna, you look absolutely perfect. I knew from the moment Seo-jun brought you home that you were meant to be part of our family." I smile warmly at her reflection in the mirror. "Thank you, Mother. I still can't believe this day is finally here." The lies fall from my lips as naturally as breathing after all these years. She beams at me, patting my cheek with affection. If she knew the thoughts behind my serene expression, she'd recoil in horror. The wedding planner appears at the door, clipboard in hand. "5 minutes until we begin, Mrs. Kim." My mother-in-law hurries out to take her place, leaving me alone with my reflection. I study myself carefully, making sure every detail is in place. The slight tremor in my hands could easily be mistaken for bridal nerves rather than carefully contained rage. The bouquet sits on a nearby table, white peonies and roses bound with silk ribbon. 20 years of careful planning have led to this moment. I was 18 when I first saw Seo-jun Kim across the university courtyard, already knowing exactly who he was and what his family had done to mine. Now, at 38, I'm about to become his wife. The wedding march begins to play, its notes floating up from the grand cathedral below. I pick up my bouquet, shoulders back, chin lifted. The door opens and my father stands there, looking handsome in his tuxedo. He has no idea that I chose this path of revenge. He thinks his daughter simply fell in love with the heir to one of Korea's largest conglomerates, the perfect fairy tale. Walking down the aisle, I keep my eyes fixed on Seo-jun. He looks devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, watching me with such naked adoration that for a moment, I almost feel guilty. Almost. Then I remember finding my mother in her bathroom 20 years ago, the pills scattered across the floor, her suicide note detailing how the Kim family had systematically destroyed everything she'd built. The ceremony passes in a blur of practiced responses and perfectly timed tears of joy. When Seo-jun kisses me, I return it with well-rehearsed passion. The crowd applauds as we turn to face them as husband and wife. I scan the faces of the gathered elite of Seoul's business world. So many of them had a hand in my mother's downfall, all of them now celebrating my union with the family that orchestrated it. At the reception, I play my role flawlessly. I laugh at the right moments, dance with grace, and make sure everyone sees how deeply in love I am with my new husband. The Kim family patriarch, my father-in-law, gives a touching speech about welcoming me into the family. If he only knew how long I'd planned this infiltration, how carefully I'd positioned myself to be exactly where I am today. Seo-jun pulls me aside during the reception, leading me to a quiet corner. "I can't believe you're finally my wife," he whispers, touching my cheek with such tenderness that I have to force myself not to flinch. "I've loved you since that first day in university when you literally ran into me with your arms full of books." That accident had taken 3 days of careful observation and timing to orchestrate perfectly. "It feels like destiny," I reply, letting my voice catch with emotion. He pulls me closer, and I rest my head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Strong, steady, trusting. He has no idea that every single moment of our relationship has been carefully calculated. Later, as we prepare to leave for our honeymoon, I catch a glimpse of myself in another mirror. The happy bride, the perfect daughter-in-law, the culmination of a 2-decade performance. My mother is here somewhere in the crowd, medicated but stable now, watching her daughter marry into the family that nearly drove her to death. She thinks I've forgiven them. She thinks love conquered all. In the limousine, Seo-jun holds my hand, running his thumb over my new wedding ring. The diamond catches the light, throwing sparkles across the leather interior. It's from the same jeweler who once crafted pieces for my mother's jewelry line, before the Kims orchestrated its hostile takeover and subsequent dissolution. "I have a surprise for you," Seo-jun says, pulling out an envelope. Inside is the deed to a penthouse in Gangnam, one of Seoul's most exclusive addresses. "I wanted us to start our life together in our own place, away from the family compound." I thank him with tears in my eyes, knowing this works perfectly into my plan. Distance from the family compound will give me more freedom to operate. Every gift he gives me, every gesture of love, becomes another weapon in my arsenal. As we drive toward our future together, I rest my head on his shoulder and think about the next phase of my plan. The wedding was just the beginning. Now that I'm officially a Kim, I'll have access to everything I need to bring them down. One day they'll understand that they invited a viper into their nest, but by then, it will be far too late. 20 years I've waited for this. 20 years of playing the perfect girlfriend, the supportive fiancé, and now the adoring wife. 20 years of documenting their illegal practices, cultivating their enemies, and positioning myself as the trusted confidante to every member of their household. My wedding day isn't just the happiest day of my life, it's the day I begin their destruction in earnest. Seo-jun kisses my temple softly, murmuring words of love. I close my eyes and let him believe my smile is one of contentment rather than anticipation. The long game is finally paying off, and I'm exactly where I need to be to tear down everything the Kim family has built, piece by precious piece. The memory of that day is seared into my mind with perfect clarity. I was 18, just accepted into Seoul National University, when I came home to find our apartment door unlocked. The silence inside was heavy, wrong. My mother's shoes were scattered in the entryway instead of neatly arranged as usual. I called out for her, but no answer came. I found her in the master bathroom, unconscious on the white tile floor, pills scattered around her like tiny white stars. My hands shook as I called the ambulance, as I cradled her head in my lap, checking her pulse over and over. The paramedics arrived in minutes that felt like hours. They worked quickly, professionally, saving her life while I stood frozen in the doorway. At the hospital, while my mother lay in intensive care, I found the notes, 3 of them, written in her usually perfect handwriting, now shaky and desperate. They detailed everything the Kim family had done, how they'd systematically destroyed our family's jewelry business through corporate espionage, fake lawsuits, and backroom deals, how they'd blacklisted my mother from every major retailer and supplier in the industry, how they'd even paid people to spread rumors about the quality of her work. The final note was addressed to me specifically. "My dearest Jin, forgive me for being weak. I couldn't bear to watch them destroy everything we built, everything I wanted to leave for you. They are too powerful. The Kim family owns too many judges, too many politicians. There is no justice for people like us." I sat in that sterile hospital room, reading those notes over and over until every word was burned into my memory. My mother's business had been small but growing handcrafted jewelry that was starting to gain attention from high-end boutiques, until the Kims decided they wanted her suppliers for themselves. They didn't just want to compete, they wanted to destroy her completely. While my mother recovered in the hospital, I began my research. The Kim family had a pattern. They'd done this before to others, crushing smaller businesses that got in their way. But they had one weakness: their only son, Seo-jun. He was my age, just starting university. Their pride and joy, their future, the perfect way in. I learned his schedule, his habits, his preferences. I enrolled in classes I knew he would take. I crafted my appearance and personality to appeal to everything I'd learned about him. The shy, studious girl with hidden depth, the kind soul who volunteered at animal shelters, the passionate artist who understood beauty and value. Our first meeting in the university courtyard was no accident. I timed it perfectly, arms full of books, appearing not to see him until we collided. He helped me gather my scattered belongings, apologizing profusely even though it was my fault. When our eyes met, I made sure to blush, to stammer slightly. He was handsome, I had to admit. Tall, with kind eyes and an easy smile. "I'm so sorry," I said, letting my voice catch slightly. I was lost in thought about my art history assignment. I'd done my homework, he was taking the same class, though we were in different sections. His eyes lit up. "Art history? Professor Kim's class? I'm in that too," just as I'd planned. We fell into an easy conversation about Renaissance painters, and I watched him become more intrigued with each carefully chosen word. At home, my mother was recovering slowly. The doctors had her on medication for depression and anxiety. She didn't ask about the note, and I never mentioned finding them. Instead, I told her about university, about the nice boy I'd met. I watched her face carefully when I mentioned his name. She flinched, just slightly, but said nothing. She was too afraid of the Kim family to warn me away. I spent the next few months laying the groundwork, casual meetings in the library, coffee between classes, gradually letting Seo-jun pursue me while making him think it was all his idea. I learned everything about him. His dreams of being more than just his father's heir, his secret passion for photography, his loneliness, hidden beneath layers of privilege and popularity. When he finally asked me on a proper date, I acted appropriately hesitant. "I'm not sure I'm in your league," I said, looking down shyly. "My family isn't exactly in the same social circle as yours." He grabbed my hand then, earnest and sincere. "I don't care about any of that. You're the most genuine person I've ever met." The irony of his words almost made me laugh. Instead, I squeezed his hand and smiled, letting him see vulnerability in my eyes. Everything about me was carefully constructed, from my fashion choices to my mannerisms, all designed to draw him in deeper. Our first date was at an art gallery, where I impressed him with my knowledge of contemporary artists. Our second was a quiet dinner where I listened attentively to his dreams and fears. By the third date, he was already falling in love with the person I pretended to be. I met his friends next, all children of Seoul's elite. I played my role perfectly, the humble scholarship student who didn't care about wealth or status. They were charmed by my apparent authenticity, never suspecting that every word, every gesture was calculated. The first time I met his parents, I wore a simple but elegant dress that I'd spent weeks choosing. His mother remarked on my natural grace, while his father seemed pleased by my academic achievements. They had no idea who I really was. My mother's company had been too small for them to remember destroying. Seo-jun fell harder with each passing day. I let him chase me, always staying just slightly out of reach, making him work for every bit of progress in our relationship. When he finally kissed me, 3 months after we met, I made sure it was perfect. The right amount of hesitation, the perfect soft sigh, the way I melted into him before pulling back with a blush. At home, I documented everything. Every conversation, every piece of information about the Kim family's business dealings. I started building a network of contacts among their household staff, their drivers, their secretaries, people they considered invisible who saw and heard everything. My mother improved gradually, but something in her had broken permanently. She started a small online jewelry business, working from home, too afraid to try anything bigger. When I told her I was dating Seo-jun Kim, she went pale but said nothing. I could see the fear in her eyes, but also relief that at least her daughter would be safe from their influence. What she didn't know was that I spent every night studying business law, finance, corporate structures. I learned everything I could about how companies like the Kims operated, about their weaknesses and pressure points. Every piece of information was a weapon I could use later. By the end of our first year together, Seo-jun was completely in love with me. He introduced me to more of his family's inner circle, never suspecting that each introduction was another opportunity for me to gather intelligence and plant seeds for future allies. I kept a photo of my mother, taken just before the Kims destroyed her business, hidden in my wallet. Whenever I felt my resolve wavering, whenever Seo-jun's genuine affection made me question my path, I would look at that photo. I remembered finding her on that bathroom floor, remembered reading those desperate notes, and my determination would return stronger than ever. This was never just about revenge. It was about justice, about making sure the Kims could never destroy another family the way they destroyed mine. Every step I took, every lie I told, was leading me closer to that goal. Seo-jun was just the first piece in a game that would take decades to play out. Looking back now, 20 years later, I can still see that 18-year-old girl transformed by grief and rage into something harder, colder. She died the day she found her mother's suicide notes, replaced by someone who could smile lovingly at her enemies while plotting their destruction. That girl became me, and I became the weapon that would finally bring the Kim family to their knees. The key to destroying someone isn't through brute force, it's through trust. Over the next year at university, I wove myself deeper into Seo-jun's life with such subtle precision that he never noticed the web tightening around him. I became his confidant, his support system, the one person he believed he could trust completely. Our relationship progressed exactly as I planned. I made sure we were seen as the perfect couple on campus. I attended all his family events, charmed his relatives, and played the role of the grateful scholarship student honored to be welcomed into their world. Every weekend dinner at the Kim mansion was an opportunity to gather more information, to observe their dynamics, to identify their weaknesses. During one such dinner, I overheard Seo-jun's father discussing a troubled shipping subsidiary with his board members. I spent the next week researching maritime law and international trade regulations. When the topic came up again, I offered a seemingly innocent suggestion that I knew would benefit them in the short term while creating vulnerabilities I could exploit years later. Mr. Kim was impressed by my business acumen. "You have quite a mind for strategy, Jinna," he said, patting my hand paternally. "Seo-jun is lucky to have found someone so intelligent." I smiled modestly and thanked him, while mentally noting another crack in their armor. Seo-jun began bringing me to important business functions. I dressed conservatively but elegantly, spoke quietly but intelligently, and always made sure to make him look good in front of his peers. I became known as his secret weapon, the girlfriend who could smooth over awkward social situations and remember everyone's names, children, and preferences. At a charity gala, I met the wife of one of their biggest competitors. Over champagne, I carefully extracted information about upcoming mergers and market movements. The next day, I made sure Seo-jun overheard me mentioning these details casually. When the information proved valuable, he credited his own business instincts, never suspecting I had orchestrated the entire exchange. I kept in constant contact with my mother, visiting her small apartment regularly. She had started teaching jewelry making classes online, finding a modest but stable income. Whenever I saw her hands shake while working with her tools, whenever I noticed how she flinched at sudden noises, my resolve strengthened. The Kim family's cruel efficiency had broken something fundamental in her. They hadn't just destroyed her business, they'd destroyed her confidence, her joy in creation, her ability to trust. Watching her struggle to rebuild even a fraction of her former life fueled my patience. This wasn't a sprint, it was a marathon, and I was prepared to run for as long as necessary. During my final year of university, I orchestrated my first major move. A small design firm that worked closely with the Kims was facing bankruptcy. Through careful manipulation of information and a series of anonymous tips, I helped Seo-jun discover the opportunity to acquire the company at a fraction of its worth. The acquisition made him look brilliant to his father and the board. No one realized that I had spent months laying the groundwork, or that I now had loyal allies within the acquired company who owed their continued employment to my behind-the-scenes intervention. Seo-jun celebrated our success with an expensive dinner. "I couldn't have done this without your support," he told me, raising his wine glass. "You always believe in me, Jin." He squeezed his hand, letting my eyes fill with pride and affection. "I'll always support you, I promised." And in that moment, it wasn't entirely a lie. Part of me did admire his determination to prove himself to his family. It would make his eventual fall all the more devastating. Our graduation approached, and with it, questions about our future. Seo-jun's parents expected him to take a position in the family company. They had plans for me too. They saw me as an asset, someone who could help guide their son while maintaining their social standing. I carefully planted the idea that I should work for a different company first to gain outside experience. It would reflect well on the family, I suggested to his mother. Show that Seo-jun isn't just dating someone looking for an easy position. She loved the idea, never suspecting that I wanted access to their competitors' information. The position I chose was at a mid-sized investment firm with connections to the Kim Group. Within 6 months, I had earned a reputation for diligence and discretion. My colleagues trusted me with sensitive information, never realizing how I categorized and stored every detail for future use. Seo-jun and I maintained our relationship through long hours and busy schedules. I made sure to be unavailable just often enough to keep him eager, but never so much that he felt neglected. Every date was carefully planned to reinforce his image of me as the perfect partner, understanding, supportive, and absolutely devoted. At night, alone in my apartment, I maintained my detailed records of everything I learned. Every business deal, every family connection, every potential weakness was documented and cross-referenced. I built financial models predicting how different moves would affect their empire, always looking years ahead. When Seo-jun proposed after 2 years of dating, I made him work for it. I expressed concerns about our different backgrounds, about maintaining my independence. Each hesitation was calculated to make him prove his devotion, to bind him to me more tightly. The proposal itself was everything a chaebol heirs should be: extravagant yet tasteful, public yet intimate. He rented out an entire art gallery, recreating significant moments from our relationship in photographs and paintings. In the final room, he had commissioned a piece incorporating jewelry designs from my mother's old collection. "I know how much your mother's work means to you," he said, dropping to one knee. "I want to support your dreams the way you've supported mine." The irony of his words, the obliviousness to his family's role in destroying those dreams, made my performance of joyful tears even more convincing. News of our engagement made the business papers. The Kims were thrilled their son had chosen someone who could enhance their corporate image while maintaining their social standing. My mother accepted the news with a tight smile and trembling hands. She never asked if I knew what I was doing. I threw myself into wedding planning with the same meticulous attention to detail that characterized all my moves. Every choice was designed to cement my image as the perfect addition to the Kim family. I chose traditional elements to please his parents while adding modern touches that made me appear progressive and sophisticated. The engagement period gave me more access to family meetings and corporate documents. I began shifting small amounts of money through complex channels, setting up offshore accounts that would prove useful later. Every transaction was legal but purposefully complex, designed to create a maze that would take years to unravel. Seo Jun's trust in me grew stronger with each passing month. He began consulting me on business decisions, sharing confidential information without hesitation. I was careful with how I used this information, playing the long game. Small suggestions here and there, always making him feel like the decisions were his own. In private moments, when Seo Jun held me and spoke of our future, I sometimes felt echoes of genuine emotion. But then I would remember my mother's suicide notes, the pills scattered on the bathroom floor, the way her hands still shook when she tried to work with the fine tools of her trade. Those memories turned any warmth to ice, reinforcing my determination. The Kim family had destroyed my mother's life with casual cruelty, seeing her as nothing more than an obstacle to their expansion. They would learn through years of carefully orchestrated destruction exactly what it felt like to be systematically dismantled. Every smile I gave them, every gesture of affection was another step toward their downfall. As the wedding approached, I could feel the pieces of my plan falling into place. The Kim family thought they were welcoming a devoted daughter-in-law into their midst. Instead, they were inviting in the architect of their destruction, and I would make sure they never saw it coming until it was far too late. My first major opportunity to prove myself to the Kim family came 6 months after the wedding. I'd spent those months carefully cultivating my image as the perfect daughter-in-law, attending every family function, managing the household with quiet efficiency, and supporting Seo Jun's role in the company. The crisis emerged during a routine audit of their shipping subsidiary. I'd been tracking the company's financial movements for months, noting the patterns of irregularities that would eventually prove useful. When rumors of accounting discrepancies began circulating among the board members, I knew it was time to act. During a family dinner, I casually mentioned an article I'd read about a similar situation at another company. The solution they found was quite elegant, I said, keeping my tone light and interested rather than pushy. They restructured their debt through a series of offshore entities. Mr. Kim looked up from his soup, suddenly interested. "Tell me more about this restructuring," he said. I laid out the strategy I'd spent months developing, presenting it as if I'd merely read about it in a business journal. The plan would save their shipping subsidiary while creating hidden vulnerabilities I could exploit years later. The board approved my suggestion, implementing it under Seo Jun's leadership. When the crisis was averted, he received the credit, but his father pulled me aside at the celebration dinner. "You have good instincts for business," he said, studying me with new respect. "Perhaps we should involve you more directly in family matters." That was exactly what I'd been waiting for. I accepted his offer with appropriate humility, all while noting how easily they trusted the quiet, supportive daughter-in-law who had just helped save their company. They never questioned why I'd been reading about corporate restructuring in my spare time. My new position gave me access to more sensitive information. I spent hours in board meetings taking careful notes that served two purposes: documenting the proceedings for the company and gathering evidence of their illegal practices for my own record. During this time, I also began identifying potential allies among their victims. The shipping crisis had affected several smaller companies, and I made sure to be the one handling communications with them. Each interaction was an opportunity to build relationships that would prove valuable later. One such connection was with Min Seo Park, the CEO of a small logistics company. Her business had nearly been destroyed by the Kims' aggressive tactics. Over lunch meetings disguised as vendor negotiations, I carefully laid the groundwork for future collaboration. "It's remarkable how you've maintained your integrity in this industry," I told her, letting her see a carefully calculated glimpse of my true feelings about the Kims' business practices. She studied me thoughtfully, and I knew she understood the subtle message beneath my words. At home, my relationship with Seo Jun grew more complex. He was genuinely proud of my contributions to the company, never suspecting that each success brought me closer to my ultimate goal. His trust in me was absolute, making it easy to access sensitive documents and information. Late one night, as we lay in bed, he confessed his fears about living up to his father's expectations. "Sometimes I think you're the only one who really understands me," he said, pulling me closer. I stroked his hair and murmured comforting words, all while thinking about the documents I discovered in his office earlier that day. The Kims' business empire empire was built on a foundation of carefully hidden corruption. Every successful venture was supported by bribes, threats, and illegal manipulations of the market. I documented everything, building a comprehensive record of their crimes while maintaining my facade of devoted wife and daughter-in-law. My mother watched my integration into the Kim family with quiet anxiety. During our weekly visits, she never mentioned the past, but I could see the fear in her eyes when I talked about my new role in the company. She had no idea that every step I took into their world was another step toward their destruction. The true test of my position came when the Kim family faced a hostile takeover attempt of one of their smaller companies. I'd been tracking the situation for months, subtly manipulating events to create the perfect crisis. When the threat emerged, I was ready with a solution that would appear to save them while actually weakening their defenses. I presented my analysis with calm confidence. The threat isn't coming from where you think, I explained, pointing to the complex web of shell companies I'd helped them create. If we reorganize our holdings through these entities, we can protect our interests while maintaining control. My strategy worked perfectly. The hostile takeover was repelled, and my position in the family strengthened further. Mr. Kim began asking for my opinion on other business matters, while his wife bragged about her brilliant daughter-in-law to her social circle. Seo Jun was ecstatic. "You're amazing," he said, celebrating our victory with expensive champagne. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I smiled and accepted his praise, knowing that each success made my eventual betrayal more devastating. The celebration dinner that followed was a perfect example of the power dynamics I'd carefully cultivated. The board members who had once dismissed me now sought my opinion. The family members who had questioned my background now praised my business acumen. Every compliment, every expression of trust, was another weapon in my arsenal. During the dinner, I excused myself to make a phone call. In reality, I was sending encrypted documents to a secure server, the latest evidence of the Kim's illegal activities. The information would be useful when the time came to expose their crime. As I worked my way deeper into the Kim family's inner circle, I never lost sight of my ultimate goal. Each day brought new opportunities to gather information, build alliance, and create vulnerabilities that would prove fatal when I finally struck. The image I presented to the world was flawless: the devoted wife, the talented businesswoman, the perfect daughter-in-law. Only in the quiet moments when I visited my mother and saw how the years hadn't erased the trauma of what the Kims had done, did I allow myself to feel the full force of my hatred. They had destroyed my mother's life with casual cruelty, seeing her as nothing more than an obstacle to their expansion. Now I was positioned at the heart of their empire, earning their trust while methodically documenting their crime. Every smile, every helpful suggestion, every business success brought me closer to the moment when I would tear their world apart. The foundation was laid. The pieces were in position. All that remained was to continue playing my role, gathering evidence, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Kims thought they had gained a valuable ally in their perfect daughter-in-law. They would learn too late that they had invited their destruction into their home. Rising through the ranks of the Kim family's corporate empire required a delicate balance of competence and humility. I made myself indispensable while never threatening Seo Jun's position or his father's authority. In board meetings, I offered insights that made both men look brilliant, carefully planting seeds of ideas that would serve my purposes later. My reputation within the family grew steadily. I handled their charity initiatives, organized their social events, and managed their public image with meticulous attention to detail. Every gala I planned, every donation I coordinated, added another layer to my carefully constructed persona. The household staff became my eyes and ears. I treated them with consistent kindness and respect, something the Kim family rarely showed. In return, they shared information about private conversations, secret meetings, and suspicious documents. Each piece of intelligence was carefully recorded and stored for future use. During a particularly tense family gathering, Mrs. Kim pulled me aside. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Jinna," she confided, squeezing my hand. "You've brought such stability to our family." I smiled warmly, thinking of the offshore accounts I'd been quietly establishing under various shell companies. Seo Jun's trust in me grew deeper with each passing month. He began sharing more sensitive information about the company's operation, never suspecting that I was documenting every illegal transaction, every questionable deal. At night, he would hold me close and talk about our future, while I mentally cataloged the evidence I'd gathered that day. The first real test of my position came when I discovered one of their key executives was embezzling funds. I could have exposed him immediately, but instead I carefully documented his activities and approached him privately. The fear in his eyes when I laid out the evidence told me I'd found another useful ally. My network of contacts within the company expanded strategically. I identified employees who had been wronged by the Kims, those who harbored resentment beneath their loyal facades. Each one became a potential asset, carefully cultivated through small favors and subtle hints of future opportunities. The most challenging aspect was maintaining my emotional distance from Seo Jun. There were moments when his genuine affection threatened to weaken my resolve. One evening, after a particularly successful board meeting, he surprised me with a gift, a delicate necklace that reminded him of my mother's early designs. "I had it made specially," he said, fastening it around my neck. "I know how much you miss creating jewelry with her." The thoughtfulness of the gesture almost made me falter. Almost. Then I remembered finding my mother unconscious on the bathroom floor, and my heart hardened again. My influence in the company continued to grow. I was invited to more private meetings, included in more sensitive discussions. The Kim family patriarch began seeking my advice on matters beyond public relations and social events. Each new responsibility was another opportunity to gather evidence and identify weaknesses. During this time, I maintained regular contact with my mother. Her online jewelry business was modestly successful, but she remained a shadow of her former self. Watching her hands shake as she worked with her tools, seeing her flinch at sudden noises, reinforced my determination. The Kim family's business practices hadn't changed. They continued to crush smaller companies, manipulate markets, and destroy lives with casual efficiency. I documented everything while playing my role as the supportive daughter-in-law who helped make their operations run smoothly. My position as Seo Jun's wife gave me access to social circles where valuable information was exchanged. At charity events and business dinners, I cultivated relationships with other corporate wives, gathering intelligence about market movements and potential threats to the Kim empire. One particular evening, at a lavish fundraiser I'd organized, I overheard a conversation about a potential merger that could affect the Kim's interests. I filed the information away while continuing to play my role as the perfect hostess, making mental notes about which board members seemed nervous about the news. The years of careful preparation were building towards something bigger. Each piece of evidence I gathered, each ally I cultivated, was part of a larger plan. The Kim family had no idea that their trusted daughter-in-law was methodically documenting every illegal transaction, every unethical decision. My relationship with Seo Jun became more complex as time passed. He genuinely valued my input on business matters, never suspecting that my suggestions were designed to create future vulnerabilities. His trust in me was complete, making it easy to access sensitive information and plant ideas that would serve my purposes. Late one night, working in my home office, Seo Jun brought me tea and kissed my temple. "You work too hard," he said fondly. "What would we do without you?" I smiled and leaned into his touch, thinking about the documents I'd discovered that afternoon, evidence of bribes paid to government officials. The most difficult moments were when Seo Jun showed real vulnerability. During a private dinner, he confessed his fears about living up to his father's legacy. "Sometimes I think you're the only one who really understands me," he said, reaching for my hand across the table. The genuine emotion in his voice almost made me feel guilty. Almost. My network of allies within the company grew stronger. The executive I'd caught embezzling introduced me to others who had been silenced by the Kim's threat. Each connection was carefully documented, each potential ally assessed for their future usefulness. The Kim family's empire was built on a foundation of corruption and fear. I watched them destroy other businesses with the same casual cruelty they'd shown my mother. Each new victim strengthened my resolve, even as I maintained my facade of devoted wife and daughter-in-law. During board meetings, I began subtly influencing company policy. My suggestions always seemed designed to protect the family's interests, but each decision created new vulnerabilities that I could exploit later. The board members who had once dismissed me now sought my opinion on crucial matters. My mother watched my rise within the Kim family with quiet anxiety. During our weekly visits, she never mentioned the past, but I could see the fear in her eyes when I talked about my role in the company. She had no idea that every step I took deeper into their world was another step toward my position was maintaining the perfect balance of competence and deference. I had to be valuable enough to keep close, but never threatening enough to arouse suspicion. Each success had to appear to benefit the Kim family while actually serving my larger purpose. My days fell into a careful routine. Board meetings where I gathered intelligence, social events where I cultivated allies, private moments with Seo Jun where I maintained his trust. Every interaction was an opportunity to strengthen my position or gather more evidence. The staff at the Kim family compound became increasingly loyal to me. My consistent kindness, compared to the family's dismissive treatment, earned their dedication. They brought me information about private conversations, suspicious visitors, unusual document deliveries, all carefully filed away for future use. As years passed, my position in the family seemed unassailable. I was the perfect daughter-in-law, the trusted advisor, the loyal wife. No one suspected that behind my warm smiles and helpful suggestions lay a carefully executed plan for their destruction. Every piece of evidence I gathered, every ally I cultivated, brought me closer to my ultimate goal. The Kim family had destroyed my mother's life with casual cruelty. They would learn, too late, that they had invited their destruction into their home in the form of the perfect daughter-in-law. The truth about the Kim family's victims began unfolding during a routine audit I'd initiated. While reviewing decades of acquisitions, I discovered a pattern far more sinister than even I had imagined. My mother's company wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of a systematic strategy of destruction. In my private office, I meticulously documented each case. The Young family's shipping company, driven to bankruptcy through orchestrated sabotage. The Park brothers' technology firm, crushed by manufactured lawsuits. The Choi family's manufacturing business, destroyed by artificially inflated supply costs. Each story echoed my mother's own tragedy. I reached out to these families discreetly, using intermediaries and secure channels. Many had rebuilt modest lives, like my mother, shadows of their former success. Others had left Korea entirely, unable to face the shame of their destruction. All of them carried deep scars from their encounters with the Kim family. During a charity event I'd organized, I met Sarah Jung, daughter of the shipping company's former owner. Like me, she'd watched her parents' destruction from the sideline. Unlike me, she'd never found a way to fight back. The rage in her eyes when she spoke about the Kims mirrored my own. "They don't just take your business," she told me, not knowing my true identity. "They take your dignity, your sense of self." My father never recovered. I listened carefully, adding her story to my growing collection of evidence. Another ally, another weapon in my arsenal. The scope of the Kims' destruction became clearer with each new discovery. They didn't just eliminate competition, they systematically destroyed families, communities, entire business networks that might one day challenge their power. The evidence I gathered painted a picture of calculated cruelty spanning generations. My plan expanded to accommodate this new information. It wasn't enough to simply destroy the Kim family's empire. Justice demanded more. Each family they'd destroyed deserved restoration, rehabilitation, a chance to rebuild what was taken from them. The challenge came in balancing my growing network of allies with my role as the perfect daughter-in-law. Each new connection required careful management. Every communication needed to be secure and untraceable. One mistake could unravel years of careful planning. Seo Jun noticed my increased interest in the company's historical record. "You're becoming quite the corporate historian," he said one evening, finding me surrounded by acquisition documents. I smiled and explained my desire to understand the family legacy better. He kissed my forehead, proud of my dedication. The weight of what I'd discovered made maintaining my facade more difficult. Watching the Kims celebrate their successes at family gatherings, knowing each triumph was built on destroyed lives, required every ounce of my self-control. My smiles felt more brittle, my laughter more forced. In my quiet moments with my mother, I began to see her trauma in a new light. She wasn't just a victim of business tactics, she was one casualty in a generational campaign of destruction. Her hands still shook when she worked with her jewelry tools, a physical manifestation of the fear the Kims had instilled. My network of allies grew stronger as I connected more victims. Each person brought new evidence, new stories of destruction. I documented everything, building a comprehensive case that would eventually expose the full scope of the Kims' crimes. The most valuable information came from unexpected sources: former employees who'd witnessed the destruction firsthand, lawyers who'd been forced to file fraudulent lawsuits, bankers who'd facilitated suspicious transactions. Each piece added depth to the pattern of corruption. During a board meeting, Mr. Kim proudly discussed their latest acquisition. I watched him detail the aggressive tactics they'd used, recognizing the same methods that had destroyed my mother's business. My suggestions for managing the transition were designed to appear helpful while creating future vulnerability. Seo Jun's trust in me remained absolute. He shared more sensitive information, brought me into more private discussions. Each new level of access revealed more evidence of the family's systematic destruction of competitors. I documented everything while maintaining my supportive wife persona. The most difficult moments came when dealing with current victims. Watching the Kims destroy another small company, knowing I could prevent it but having to maintain my cover, tested my resolve. Each new casualty was carefully added to my evidence, their story preserved for future justice. My relationship with Seo Jun grew more complex as I discovered more about his family's crime. His genuine affection for me contrasted sharply with his casual participation participation in his family's destruction of others. The dichotomy made maintaining my emotional distance both easier and more challenging. Late one night, after a particularly difficult day of discoveries, Seo-jun found me in my office. "You work too hard," he said, massaging my shoulders. "Sometimes I think you care more about the company than I do." If he only knew the truth behind my dedication. The evidence I gathered revealed a pattern of destruction that spanned decades. The Kims didn't just eliminate competition, they systematically destroyed anyone who might challenge their power. Each acquisition, each merger, each bankruptcy had a human cost that the family never acknowledged. My mother's jewelry business was just one small thread in a vast tapestry of destruction. The Kims had refined their methods over generations, becoming more efficient at crushing opposition while maintaining a veneer of legitimate business practices. The scope of their crimes demanded a response of equal magnitude. My plan evolved from simple revenge to something larger, a systematic dismantling of their empire that would provide restitution to their victims. Each piece of evidence I gathered would serve both justice and restoration. My position as the trusted daughter-in-law became more valuable as I discovered more victims. I could access records, verify stories, connect patterns that others had missed. The perfect wife persona provided cover for my growing network of allies and informants. The most challenging aspect was maintaining my emotional equilibrium. Each new discovery of the Kim's cruelty tested my ability to play my role. Watching them celebrate their successes, knowing the human cost of each victory, required incredible self-control. During family gatherings, I listened to them discuss their business triumphs with new understanding. Each casual mention of a successful acquisition now carried the weight of destroyed lives. I smiled and nodded while mentally adding new evidence to my growing case against them. The network of victims I discovered shared a common thread beyond their destruction. Each had faced not just financial ruin but systematic dismantling of their support systems. The Kims didn't just destroy businesses, they destroyed families, relationships, entire communities. My documentation became more comprehensive with each new discovery. Financial records, personal testimonies, evidence of illegal tactics, all carefully preserved and cross-referenced. The case I was building would eventually expose not just individual crimes but a generational pattern of destruction. Seo-jun's role in all this became clearer as I gathered more evidence. He wasn't just his father's son, he was an active participant in the family's methods. His genuine love for me existed alongside his casual acceptance of destroying others' lives. The contradiction strengthened my resolve. The scope of what I discovered sometimes threatened to overwhelm me. The Kim's pattern of destruction went beyond simple business competition. It was a systematic campaign to eliminate any potential challenge to their power. Each victim's story added another layer. With my mother, I began to understand why her recovery had been so difficult. She wasn't just a victim of aggressive business tactics, she was one target in a generational campaign of destruction. Her trauma was part of a larger pattern that demanded justice. The evidence I gathered would serve multiple purposes. Beyond exposing the Kim's crimes, it would provide the basis for restitution to their victims. Each document, each testimony, each piece of evidence was another step toward both justice and healing. The first crack in my carefully constructed facade appeared during a routine board meeting. Mr. Kim was discussing their latest acquisition target, a small tech startup that had developed promising AI technology. As he detailed the aggressive tactics they planned to use, I recognized them immediately, the same methods they'd used against my mother's company. My hand trembled slightly as I took notes, an involuntary reaction that caught Seo-jun's attention. He placed his hand over mine under the table, misinterpreting my reaction as concern for the company's risk. I quickly recovered, suggesting refinements to their strategy that would appear helpful while creating future vulnerability. That evening, during dinner with the extended family, Mrs. Kim proudly discussed her latest charity initiative. "Jin has been instrumental in improving our corporate image," she said, beaming at me. "Such a perfect addition to our family." The irony of her words nearly made me laugh. The real challenge came when an unexpected visitor arrived at my office the following week. Park Min-ho, son of one of the Kim family's earliest victims, had tracked me down. He knew about my marriage to Seo-jun and suspected my true motives. The risk of exposure was immediate and severe. I invited him into my office, maintaining my composed exterior while internally calculating possible responses. "I know what they did to your mother," he said without preamble. "Just like they destroyed my father's company 20 years ago." Instead of denying everything, I took a calculated risk. I let him see a glimpse of my true self, just enough to turn a potential threat into an ally. "The Kims have destroyed many families," I said carefully. "Some of us have longer memories than they expect." Min-ho became a valuable addition to my network, providing historical documents and connecting me with other victims from the Kim family's early years. Each new piece of evidence strengthened my position, but the increased activity also raised the risk of discovery. Seo-jun noticed subtle changes in my behavior. "You seem distracted lately," he said one night, pulling me close. Is everything all right? I blamed work stress and family obligation, using his concern to reinforce his image of me as the devoted wife struggling to meet everyone's expectations. The near discovery came during a charity gala I'd organized. Minho attended as a potential donor, but his bitter remarks about corporate responsibility drew unwanted attention. I smoothly intervened, explaining him away as an eccentric philanthropist while signaling him to leave immediately. That incident forced me to reevaluate my security measure. I implemented stricter protocols for communication with my network, created additional layers of protection for my documented evidence, and became more selective about direct meetings. The strain of maintaining my facade grew heavier. Each family dinner, each board meeting, each intimate moment with Seo-jun required perfect control. The weight of 2 decades of deception began to show in subtle ways. My smiles took more effort, my laughter sounded hollow even to my ears. During a weekend at the Kim family compound, I nearly slipped again. Mrs. Kim was showing off her jewelry collection, including pieces that had been commissioned from my mother's competitors after they'd destroyed her business. My hand clenched around my wine glass so tightly it nearly shattered. Seo-jun saved me from exposure, mistaking my tension for a migraine and suggesting we retire early. In our private suite, he held me with genuine concern, while I fought to suppress 20 years of rage and hatred. His tenderness made my deception feel heavier than ever. The next morning, over breakfast with the family, I maintained my perfect daughter-in-law persona while mentally reviewing my contingency plan. The incident had shown me how easily 20 years of work could be undone by a moment of weakness. My network of allies grew increasingly concerned about my safety. Many had witnessed the Kim family's ruthlessness firsthand and feared what would happen if my true purpose was discovered. I assured them my position was secure, while privately increasing my security measures. The pressure peaked during a critical merger negotiation. The Kim family was acquiring another company using their typical aggressive tactics. As I sat in meetings, documenting their methods while appearing supportive, I recognized several board members from my mother's era. One of them, an elderly man named Director Young, kept looking at me strangely. Later, he cornered me in a hallway. "You look exactly like her," he said quietly. "Your mother, I remember when." I cut him off smoothly, maintaining my smile while steering him toward the meeting room. That night, I received an encrypted message from Director Jung. Instead of threatening exposure, he offered his help. He'd carried guilt about my mother's destruction for years and saw this as his chance for redemption. Another ally, but also another risk. The incident forced me to accelerate some of my plans while delaying others. I carefully redistributed evidence among my network, ensuring no single person held enough information to threaten the overall strategy. Each adjustment increased security but also complexity. Seo-jun's growing dependence on me complicated matters further. He increasingly sought my advice on business decisions, personal matters, family conflicts. Each show of trust was both a victory and a burden, pushing me deeper into a role I'd come to despise. My mother noticed the strain during our weekly visits. "You look tired, Jinna," she said, studying my face with concern. "Maybe it's time to step back from the company." The suggestion, meant with love, only highlighted how little she understood about my true purpose. The mask slipped again during a private dinner with Seo-jun. He was discussing future plans, talking about children and legacy. The thought of continuing this deception for another generation, of bringing children into this web of lies and revenge, made me physically ill. I covered my reaction by claiming food poisoning, but the incident shook me. For the first time in 20 years, I questioned whether I could maintain this performance indefinitely. The weight of my deception felt heavier than ever. The following week, during a board meeting, I watched the Kim family destroy another small company with their usual efficiency. My mask remained perfect, my suggestions helpful, my manner supportive, but inside, something shifted. The time for waiting was coming to an end. My network of allies sensed the change. Messages became more frequent, preparations more intense. Everyone could feel the momentum building toward something decisive. The challenge would be maintaining control when everything began to unravel. That evening, as I prepared for bed, Seo-jun wrapped his arms around me from behind. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said softly. "You're the best thing that ever happened to our family." The sincerity in his voice made my heart ache, even as I planned his family's destruction. The next morning, reviewing my extensive documentation of the Kim family's crimes, I realized the mask had become almost impossible to maintain. 20 years of perfect performance had taken their toll. Something would have to give soon. My mother's hands still shook when she worked with her jewelry tools, a constant reminder of why I'd embarked on this path. The Kim family's destruction of her business, her confidence, her joy in creation demanded justice. The mask would stay in place until that justice was served. The weight of maintaining my facade grew heavier with each passing day. Every smile, every gesture of affection, Every supportive comment felt like another brick in a wall that was slowly crushing me. But I had come too far to falter now. Initiating the final phase of my plan required perfect timing. After 20 years of careful preparation, I had positioned myself at the heart of the Kim family's empire. My network of allies was in place, my evidence securely documented, and my financial maneuvers carefully concealed beneath layers of legitimate transaction. The opportunity came during a major corporate restructuring. The Kim family was consolidating their holdings, preparing to expand into new markets. I had spent months laying the groundwork, subtly guiding their decisions toward this moment. Each suggestion I made appeared designed to strengthen their position while actually creating critical vulnerabilities. I presented my analysis of their corporate structure. Our current organization leaves us exposed to market fluctuations, I explained, pointing to carefully prepared charts. A series of strategic reorganizations would provide better protection. My recommendations were accepted without question. My reputation for financial acumen was beyond reproach. The restructuring began immediately. I worked closely with their legal team, suggesting specific changes that appeared to streamline operations while actually concentrating power in carefully chosen subsidiaries. Each modification was designed to facilitate the transfer of assets when the time came. Seo-jun trusted my judgment completely. "I don't know how we managed before you," he said, reviewing the documents I'd prepared. "You understand our business better than anyone." His faith in me had become absolute, exactly as I'd planned. The first major move involved transferring significant assets to offshore entities. I presented it as a tax optimization strategy, supported by complex financial models and legal opinions. The Kim family approved without hesitation, never suspecting that these entities were structured to be easily separated from their control. My network of allies began moving into position, former victims of the Kim family's aggression, now successful in their own right, prepared to acquire key subsidiaries once they became vulnerable. Each player knew their role, understood the timing, waited for my signal. The strain of maintaining my performance increased as the endgame approached. Every interaction with the family required perfect control. One misstep, one moment of satisfaction showing through my mask of devotion, would destroy everything I'd built. During a family dinner, Mr. Kim proudly discussed their latest acquisition. I smiled and offered supportive comments while mentally calculating how this new company would fit into my plans. The entire empire was becoming a house of cards, ready to collapse at the right moment. Seo-jun noticed my increased focus on work. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said one night, massaging my shoulders. "Let me help more." I accepted his concern with appropriate gratitude, using it to justify spending more time in the office, finalizing preparations. The most challenging aspect was maintaining my emotional distance. After 20 years, some genuine feelings had developed despite my best efforts. Seo-jun's trust in me, his genuine love, made what I was about to do both harder and more necessary. My mother's condition improved slightly over the years, but she never fully recovered. Watching her still struggle with the trauma the Kims had inflicted strengthened my resolve. Every tremor in her hands, every flinch at sudden noises, reminded me why this destruction was necessary. The financial maneuvers became more complex as the plan progressed. Each transaction was legal on its surface, supported by proper documentation and expert opinions. The true nature of these changes would only become apparent when viewed as a whole, after it was too late to stop them. My position as the trusted daughter-in-law proved invaluable during this phase. No one questioned my access to sensitive information or my interest in complex financial structure. My suggestions were accepted without suspicion, my loyalty considered beyond doubt. The pressure peaked during a series of crucial board meetings. Each decision point required careful manipulation, guiding the family toward choices that appeared beneficial while actually weakening their control. My mask remained perfect, my performance flawless. Seo-jun's complete trust became both an asset and a burden. His constant affection, his absolute faith in my devotion, made maintaining my facade increasingly difficult. Each genuine moment of tenderness from him felt like another weight added to my conscience. The final pieces fell into place during a major corporate event. Key players were positioned throughout the company, documentation was secured, and financial triggers were set. Everything was ready for the moment when I would finally reveal 20 years of deception. My network of allies reported regular updates, each confirmation bringing us closer to the endgame. Former victims of the Kim family waited patiently for their chance at justice, their role in the coming destruction carefully concealed behind legitimate business interests. The strain began showing in subtle ways. My hands shook slightly when signing documents. My smile felt increasingly brittle during family gathering. Only years of practice kept anyone from noticing these small cracks in my perfect facade. During a private moment, Seo Jun pulled me close and whispered, "I don't tell you enough how much you mean to our family." His sincerity made my heart ache, even as I mentally reviewed the steps that would destroy everything he held dear. The pressure of maintaining my performance became almost unbearable as the final phase approached. Every interaction required perfect control, every response carefully measured. 20 years of deception weighed heavily, but the end was finally in sight. My mother remained unaware of my true activities. During our weekly visits, she worried about my involvement with the Kim family, never suspecting that I was about to avenge her destruction. Her continued trauma fueled my determination to see this through to the end. The final preparations moved forward with precision. Each piece of my plan was checked and rechecked, each contingency accounted for. The Kim family's empire had taken generations to build. I would bring it down in a matter of days. As I reviewed the evidence one last time, I felt the weight of 20 years of deception pressing down on me. The mask had become almost impossible to maintain, but it would only need to hold for a little longer. Justice was finally within reach. The night before everything was set to begin, Seo Jun held me close in bed. "I love you," he whispered, drifting off to sleep. I lay awake, listening to his steady breathing, knowing these were the last peaceful moments he would ever know. My position had been crafted perfectly over 2 decades. Every detail of my plan had been vetted, every possible response considered. The Kim family's destruction would be complete, and they would never see it coming until it was far too late. The collapse of the Kim family empire began on a Tuesday morning during a routine board meeting. I sat at my usual place beside Seo Jun, appearing to take notes while secretly initiating the sequence of events I'd planned for 20 years. The first domino fell when reports of financial irregularities in their shipping subsidiary hit the media. I had carefully leaked selected documents to key journalists, each piece of evidence suggesting deeper problems. The Kim family remained calm, confident in their ability to control the narrative. Mr. Kim called an emergency meeting to address the situation. I watched him dismiss the reports as baseless allegations, even as more evidence surfaced. My carefully cultivated network of allies began moving into position, each playing their assigned role in the unfolding drama. Seo Jun turned to me for advice, as he had countless times before. I suggested a strategy that appeared defensive but would actually expose more vulnerabilities. "We need to show complete transparency," I said, knowing this would open them to further scrutiny. The media attention intensified as more documents emerged. Evidence of systematic corruption, market manipulation, and illegal business practices began flooding news outlets. Each revelation was timed perfectly, building on the previous ones, creating an overwhelming cascade of scandal. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from my network. Former victims of the Kim family provided additional testimony, while strategic allies moved to acquire vulnerable assets. The empire began crumbling faster than even I had anticipated. During a family dinner that evening, the tension was palpable. Mrs. Kim's hands shook as she lifted her wine glass. Mr. Kim received constant phone calls from panicked board members and investors. Only I maintained perfect composure, playing my role until the very end. Seo Jun worked through the night, trying to contain the damage. I stayed by his side, offering support while secretly coordinating the next wave of revelations. Each suggestion I made led him further into the trap I'd spent decades constructing. The following morning brought news of major shareholders demanding emergency meetings. The stock price plummeted as investors rushed to sell. My careful financial maneuvers ensured that control of key subsidiaries shifted to my allies, disguised as routine market transactions. The Kim family's attempts to maintain control grew increasingly desperate. They called in political favors, threatened legal action, tried to buy silence, but I had anticipated every move, prepared countermeasures for each possible response. Mr. Kim finally realized something was wrong when he discovered their offshore accounts had been frozen. The complex web of shell companies I'd helped create became a maze trapping their assets. His face turned ashen as he understood the extent of their markets and mounting scandals. Seo Jun still trusted me completely. He sought my counsel, followed my suggestions, never suspecting that each action drove another nail into his family's coffin. The evidence I'd gathered over 20 years proved devastating. Documentation of bribes, illegal takeovers, market manipulation, and destroyed lives painted a picture of systematic corruption that shocked even those familiar with corporate misconduct. Former victims of the Kim family began filing lawsuits, armed with evidence I'd helped them compile. Each case added to the growing tsunami of legal and financial disasters. The careful carefully constructed image of corporate respectability crumbled completely. My mother watched the news coverage in silence, her hands trembling as she recognized the names of old competitors, former friends, all destroyed by the Kim family's ruthless practices. She never suspected my role in their downfall. The final blow came when international authorities launched investigations into the Kim Group's global operation. The evidence I'd provided through anonymous channels exposed decades of international financial crime. Seo Jun's faith in me began to waver only when he discovered crucial documents missing from the company archive. By then, it was far too late. The carefully constructed trap had sprung, leaving no path to escape. I maintained my supportive wife persona until the very end, even as I watched his world collapse around him. Each moment of trust he showed made my victory more complete and more painful. The Kim family's desperate attempts to save their empire only accelerated its destruction. Every defensive move they made had been anticipated and countered before they even conceived it. 20 years of planning left nothing to chance. The impact spread beyond the family's business interests. Their social standing crumbled as former friends and allies distanced themselves. The charitable foundations I'd managed became vehicles for redistributing assets to their victims. My network of allies emerged as key players in the restructured companies, ensuring the Kim family could never regain control. Each piece of their empire was systematically stripped away, leaving them powerless and exposed. The media portrayed their downfall as a spontaneous collapse triggered by corporate misconduct. Only a select few knew the truth that their destruction had been orchestrated over decades by the perfect daughter-in-law they had welcomed into their home. In the end, their empire fell not through outside attack but through careful internal dismantling. Every weakness I'd created, every vulnerability I'd engineered, contributed to their complete destruction. Seo Jun's realization of my true role came gradually, as he pieced together the evidence of my 20-year deception. The look of betrayal in his eyes carried all the pain I'd hoped to inflict when I first began this journey of revenge. The Kim family's destruction proved total, not just financial but social and personal as well. Everything they had built through generations of corruption and cruelty crumbled in a matter of weeks, exactly as I had planned. The confrontation with Seo Jun occurred in his private office, late one evening as the last pieces of his family's empire crumbled around him. He sat behind his desk, surrounded by newspapers detailing their downfall, when he finally connected all the threads that led back to me. "You knew," he said quietly, his voice carrying 20 years of betrayal. "You knew everything from the beginning, about your mother's company, about all of it." His hands trembled as he lifted a file containing evidence of my careful manipulation. I stood before him, finally dropping the mask I'd worn for 2 decades. "Your family destroyed my mother's life with casual cruelty," I replied, my voice steady. "Did you really think no one would ever make you pay for it?" The color drained from his face as he realized the extent of my deception. 20 years, he whispered. "Every moment, every kiss, every time you said you loved me, it was all a lie." The pain in his voice held no satisfaction for me now. I moved closer to his desk, watching him recoil slightly. "I planned every detail," I confirmed. "Each business success I helped you achieve was designed to create vulnerabilities. Every relationship I helped you build contained the seeds of betrayal." His eyes searched my face, looking for any trace of the woman he thought he'd married. "I suspected something was wrong these past few weeks," he admitted. "But I never imagined. How could you maintain such a perfect deception for so long?" The truth flowed easily now that there was no need for pretense. "Your family taught me how," I said. "Every time you crushed another small company, every life you destroyed without a second thought, I learned from the masters of manipulation." Seo Jun stood suddenly, anger replacing shock. "We gave you everything," he snarled. "Position, wealth, status. You were nothing before us." His words echoed his family's inherent arrogance, confirming the justice of my actions. I laughed softly, the sound carrying no warmth. "You gave me exactly what I needed: access to every secret, every weakness, every illegal transaction. I documented everything while playing the perfect wife." The realization of his complete defeat showed in his eyes. "The offshore accounts, the restructuring, the leaked documents, it was all you." His voice cracked. "I trusted you completely." Moving to the window, I gazed out at the city lights. "Your trust was my greatest weapon," I acknowledged. "The devoted wife, the supportive daughter-in-law. No one questions perfection." He slumped back into his chair, aged decades in minutes. "Why now? After 20 years, why trigger everything at this moment?" The question revealed how little he truly understood. I turned back to face him. Because the destruction had to be complete, I explained. Your family didn't just take businesses, they destroyed lives, families, entire communities. Justice demanded nothing less. Seo Jun's face hardened. Justice? You call this justice? You spent 20 years lying, manipulating, pretending to love me. You're worse than anything you accuse us of. The words struck harder than I expected. Perhaps, I conceded, but unlike your family, I never pretended my actions were anything but revenge. He leaned forward, desperation entering his voice. We can still fix this, he pleaded. Together, we could rebuild everything. I know you felt something real for me during these years. The offer hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. That's why it had to end now, I said quietly. Because after 20 years, the line between truth and deception was becoming too blurred. His expression crumpled. So even the moments I thought were real, the private times when it was just us, those were all calculated too? The pain in his voice matched the ache in my chest. I maintained my composure, though the weight of 20 years pressed down on me. Every moment served the ultimate goal, I confirmed. Your destruction had to be complete, personal as well as financial. Seo Jun stood again, moving around the desk toward me. Look me in the eyes and tell me you never felt anything real, he demanded. 20 years is too long to fake everything. I met his gaze steadily. What I felt doesn't matter, I replied. Your family taught me that business isn't about feelings, it's about power and consequences. He reached for me, but I stepped back. The woman I loved never existed, he realized aloud. She was just a character you created to destroy us. The truth of his words hung between us. She was whatever you needed her to be, I corrected. The perfect wife, designed to make your destruction more complete. Seo Jun's shoulders sagged in defeat. What happens now? He asked, his voice hollow. You've taken everything. What more do you want? I moved toward the door, my role in this drama finally complete. Justice has been served, I said simply. Your family will never hurt anyone else again, he called out as I reached for the handle. Was any of it real? Did you ever, even for a moment, love me? The desperation in his voice nearly broke my composure. I paused, hand on the door. You'll never know, I replied softly. That's part of your punishment too. With those words, I left him alone with the ruins of his empire. Walking through the empty office building, I felt the weight of 20 years lifting from my shoulder. The mask I'd worn for so long could finally be set aside. The perfect wife, the devoted daughter-in-law could cease to exist. My mother was waiting at home, still unaware of my role in the Kim family's destruction. Her hands would always shake. Her confidence would never fully return, but at least she would know they could never hurt anyone else. The confrontation with Seo Jun marked the end of a chapter that had consumed most of my adult life. The revenge I'd planned so carefully was complete, but the victory felt hollow in ways I hadn't anticipated. As I drove home through the night, I realized that 20 years of deception had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. The mask had become part of my face. The performance had altered my reality. The Kim family's destruction was complete, but the cost of my revenge was still being tallied. In becoming the architect of their downfall, I had transformed into something I never intended to be. Jun's final question echoed in my mind as I drove through the empty streets. The truth was more complex than either of us wanted to admit after 20 years. The line between real and pretend had blurred beyond recognition. The Kim family empire collapsed with astonishing speed once all the pieces were in place. Within weeks, their corporate holdings were dismantled, their assets frozen or redistributed, their reputation destroyed beyond repair. I watched from my carefully constructed position as everything they'd built over generations crumbled to dust. The takeover proceeded exactly as I'd planned. Each subsidiary fell into the hands of my ally, many of them former victims of the Kim family's aggression. The complex web of financial transactions I'd engineered proved impossible to untangle or reverse. My mother learned of my involvement when the story broke in the media. She came to my apartment unannounced, her hands shaking worse than ever. "What have you done?" she whispered, staring at the newspapers spread across my coffee table. I tried to explain, to make her understand that this was justice, revenge for what they'd done to her, but she backed away from me, horror in her eyes. "I never wanted this," she said. "I never wanted you to become like them." Her words struck deeper than any reaction from the Kim family. In her eyes, I saw not pride or satisfaction, but fear. The same fear I'd seen when she looked at Mr. Kim all those years ago. I had become what she feared most. The corporate world reeled from the revelations of the Kim family's crimes. Evidence I'd gathered over 20 years exposed decades of corruption, illegal practices, and destroyed lives. Each new disclosure brought more victims forward, creating an avalanche of legal action. Seo Jun attempted suicide a week after our confrontation. He survived, but the attempt made headlines, adding another layer to the family's disgrace. I received the news with an emptiness that surprised me. 20 years of planning revenge hadn't prepared me for the hollow victory. The Kim family mansion, once a symbol of their power, stood empty. Mrs. Kim retreated to a relative's home in the countryside. Mr. Kim faced multiple criminal investigations. The charitable foundations I'd managed were transferred to independent control, their funds redirected to the families they'd destroyed. My network of allies emerged from the shadows, taking control of key assets and operations. The restructuring I'd planned ensured that the Kim family's former victims received compensation, their lost businesses restored where possible. In the aftermath, I found myself in control of a significant portion of their former empire. The position I'd worked 20 years to achieve felt strangely meaningless. The power I'd sought brought no satisfaction, only a growing awareness of what I'd become. The media painted me as both villain and hero. Some praised the exposure of corporate corruption while others condemned my methods. The truth, as always, was more complex than any headline could capture. My mother stopped taking my calls. The weekly visits that had fueled my resolve for 20 years ended abruptly. She couldn't reconcile the daughter she'd raised with the woman who had executed such a calculated revenge. The corporate offices where I'd played my roles so perfectly felt different now. Employees who had once smiled warmly at the perfect Mrs. Kim now watched me with wary respect tinged with fear. They recognized in me the same ruthless efficiency that had characterized the family I'd destroyed. Seo Jun's words during our final confrontation haunted me. "You're worse than anything you accuse us of," he'd said. Looking at my reflection in the office windows, I couldn't deny the truth in his accusation. The evidence I'd gathered served its purpose, destroying the Kim family completely. But it also revealed how thoroughly I'd transformed myself into a creature of calculation and deception. 20 years of wearing a mask had changed my face beneath it. Former victims of the Kim family sought me out, some offering gratitude, others looking for opportunities in the restructured companies. Each meeting reminded me of what I'd accomplished, but also of the cost. The legal proceedings against the Kim family continued for months. I testified when required, my composed exterior never cracking as I detailed their crimes. The prosecutors never suspected that my testimony was the culmination of a 20-year performance. My mother's online jewelry business continued to operate modestly. She declined my offers of support or expansion. The capital I could now provide meant nothing to her. She saw it as tainted by the same corruption she'd once fled. The corporate empire I'd helped destroy was rebuilt under new management, with stricter oversight and ethical guidelines. I maintained controlling interests through various shell companies, but the victory felt Pyrrhic. Late at night, alone in my office, I would sometimes remember the young woman who had found her mother unconscious on the bathroom floor. She had sworn revenge, never understanding that the price of vengeance would be her own humanity. The Kim family's destruction was complete, but so was my transformation. In becoming the architect of their downfall, I had crafted myself into something just as calculating, just as ruthless as those I'd set out to destroy. My mother's words echoed in my mind. "I never wanted you to become like them." Looking at what I'd accomplished, at what I'd become, I finally understood the true cost of revenge. The victory was absolute, but the price was higher than I'd ever imagined. The empire I'd gained through decades of deception offered no comfort. The power I'd acquired brought no peace. In destroying the Kim family, I had become a reflection of their worst qualities, and my mother's horror was the final proof of my transformation. The perfect mask I'd worn for 20 years had become my true face, and there was no going back to the person I'd been before. The victory was complete, but the cost was my own soul. Sitting in my corner office atop what was once the Kim Group headquarters, I surveyed the city sprawling below. The empire I'd spent 20 years infiltrating now belonged to me, though belonged felt like a hollow word. In destroying them, I had become them possession without peace, power without purpose. The phone on my desk rang, another call from someone seeking revenge against a corporate giant. My reputation had spread through certain circles, a woman who could orchestrate the perfect downfall. They all wanted what I had achieved, not understanding the cost. My mother had finally agreed to meet me for lunch after months of silence. We sat in an upscale restaurant, the kind she would have never been able to afford before. Her hands still shook as she lifted her water glass. "I don't recognize you anymore," she said quietly. "The daughter I raised died somewhere in those 20 years. She was right. The young woman who had sworn revenge died long ago, replaced by someone who could maintain a perfect performance for decades. The mask had become my face, the deception my truth. I had achieved complete victory and lost myself in the process." Seojun had been released from the psychiatric facility. Reports said he had moved abroad, unable to face the shame of his family's downfall. Sometimes I dreamed of our last conversation, of the moment he realized every kiss, every tender word had been calculated. Those dreams always ended with my mother's voice. "You've become like them." The corporate world had changed in the wake of the Kim family's destruction. New regulations, stricter oversight, more attention to ethical practices. I maintained my control through a web of shell companies and loyal allies, watching as others sought to fill the power vacuum. Another woman came to my office seeking help. Her family's business had been destroyed by corporate raiders, her father's life ruined. She had the same fire in her eyes that I'd had at 18. I recognized in her the potential for transformation, the willingness to sacrifice everything for revenge. The cycle was continuing. My victory over the Kim family had inspired others, creating a new generation of avengers. They saw only the success, not understanding that the price of perfect revenge was becoming what you sought to destroy. My mother's jewelry business remained small, but she had finally stopped flinching at sudden noises. The trauma the Kims inflicted would never fully heal, but she had found a kind of peace. Looking at her work now, I realized she had achieved something I never could: authenticity in the face of destruction. The evidence of my 20-year deception remained securely stored, a reminder of what I'd accomplished and what I'd lost. Each document, each recorded conversation, each carefully orchestrated betrayal told the story of my transformation from victim to victor to something else entirely. More calls came in, more requests for assistance in taking down corporate giants. Each person had a story similar to mine: families destroyed, lives ruined, justice denied through legal channels. They all thought I had found the perfect solution. The corporate offices still bore subtle traces of the Kim family's presence: design choices, artwork, architectural detail. I kept them as reminders of what complete victory looked like, and how hollow it felt. The legacy of my revenge was written in marble and steel. My mother's final words at lunch stayed with me. "The Kims destroyed my business, but you let them destroy your soul." The truth of her assessment was reflected in every decision I made, every calculated move that proved I had indeed become what I had set out to destroy. Only a cold satisfaction in its efficient operation. I had learned too well from those I had destroyed: power was its own purpose, control its own reward. The perfect revenge had crafted me into the perfect corporate predator. Alone in my office each night, I would sometimes remember the young woman who had planned this revenge. She couldn't have known that success would mean losing herself so completely. The mask of perfection had become permanent, the performance indistinguishable from reality. The cycle of revenge continued, spinning out new stories of destruction and transformation. I had become both warning and inspiration, a symbol of perfect vengeance and its ultimate cost. The empire I'd gained through decades of deception stood as testament to what could be achieved if you were willing to lose everything, including yourself. My mother's hands still shook, my dreams still echoed with Seo, Jun's final questions, and my reflection showed the face I had crafted for revenge. The victory was complete, but the price of perfection was the death of authenticity. In destroying the Kim family, I had ensured their legacy would live on through me. The phone rang again, someone else seeking the perfect revenge. I looked out over the city, understanding now that complete victory meant complete transformation. The cycle would continue, creating new masks, new deceptions, new perfect facades hiding the cost of revenge. The empire I controlled operated with the same ruthless efficiency I had once despised. The power I wielded came from the same source I had sought to destroy. The perfect revenge had created the perfect irony. I had become the very thing my mother had feared, and there was no going back. In the end, the victory belonged not to the young woman who had sworn revenge, but to the system that had transformed her. The cycle continued, the empire grew, and the perfect mask became the only reality I would ever know.